Hello everyone, today's video I'll be reviewing Amazing Spider-Man from 2012 with the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man series. After the mixed result of Spider-Man 3, despite making a lot of money at the box office, Sam Raimi wanted to make a fourth Spider-Man movie for a rebound after not being happy and satisfied how the way Spider-Man 3 turned out to be. Sony wanted to make a Spider-Man 4 and 5 and to be released back-to-back in 2011-2012. Because Sony were not allowed to have Sam Raimi have complete control how he wanted to make a fourth Spider-Man movie, Sam Raimi stepped down as director and left the franchise. So instead of making a sequel, Sony decided to do a reboot to Spider-Man instead of a sequel. In high school, my senior year, I'll never forget when they announced Tobey Maguire and Sam Raimi were not coming back for another Spider-Man movie. I was sad, upset, and was going to miss Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man because I grew up on Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. And at that time, it was hard for me to imagine anybody else other than him playing the role of Spider-Man and Peter Parker. I'll also never get around the time when there were internet rumors about the idea for a fourth Spider-Man movie. They wanted John Malkovich as the Vulture, and Anne Hathaway was going to play Black Cat. And ironically, she played Catwoman in Dark Knight Rises in 2012. But once when Sam Raimi booted off the franchise and decided not to make a sequel, this did not happen at all. This movie came out around the time when the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies were doing so well around this time period. Sony still owned the rights to Spider-Man around this time, and Spider-Man was not owned by Disney yet in 2012. Despite that, around 2009, Disney bought the rights to Marvel, but unfortunately, Disney didn't have the rights to certain Marvel characters yet around this time period. When they also announced the reboot, I was skeptical hearing about the new direction they wanted to go in for a new Spider-Man reboot, making it darker compared to the Sam Raimi movies. At the same time, I went in with an open-minded to give it a chance, and maybe I'll be wrong and have my mind blown away. But unfortunately, that was not the case with this movie for me. I was also concerned about how they wanted to use the Ultimate Spider-Man story comics. As a kid, I read only one or two volumes of that series as a kid, but I didn't really have much interest to read the rest of the comics of that series as a kid. And I'll explain why when I talk about Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man's performance in this movie. Amazing Spider-Man was directed by Mark Webb, who prior to this directed music videos, and he also directed the romantic comedy drama film 500 Days of Summer with Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Zooey Deschanel. Since then, he's directed films like Gifted and The Only Living Boy in New York. The movie was produced by Laura Ziskin. This is one of her last movies she produced before passing away in 2011 from breast cancer. Her last film she produced before she died was The Butler with Forrest Whitaker. It was also produced by Avi Arad. These two previously produced the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, and it was also produced by Mac Tolmach. Hopefully I'm saying that name right. The story was written by James Vanderbilt, who also did the screenplay, and he also wrote Zodiac. He would go on to write other horror movies like Ready or Not and the recent Scream movies. The screenplay was written by Alvin Sargent, who did the screenplay for Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy. This is his last film he did before passing away in 2019. Steve Kloves also co-wrote the screenplay. The music was composed by James Horner, who composed Titanic, Aliens, A Beautiful Mind, and so many other good movies. The movie stars Andrew Garfield, Emma Stone, Rhys Ifans, Dennis Leary, Campbell Scott, Irfan Khan, Martin Sheen, and Sally Field. The plot to Amazing Spider-Man is about Peter Parker. Parents leave him at his Aunt May and Uncle Ben's, and are raised by his aunt and uncle. When Peter Parker becomes a teenager, he experiences his first crush. He finds a briefcase that belongs to his father. He wants to know the truth about his parents. His search leads him to Dr. Connors at Oscorp. Dr. Connors is creating a serum to help his arm grow back that he lost. Despite that the arm does grow back successfully, he mutates into the Lizard Man. I saw this in the movie theaters with a friend of mine when it came out. I saw it with my friend Wolfman Sam, who I do a podcast with on Rumble. Seeing this in the movie theaters and rewatching for this review, my opinion has not changed, and my opinions are the same as they were back in 2012. This movie is not any better or good than what I remember. This movie was not magic like Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man movies. As a kid seeing that in the theaters compared to this, I walked out disappointed, not happy how they rebooted this series. It was also not like the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy either. Andrew Garfield's performance as Peter Parker was not good. I did not like that they made Peter Parker a punk and a bully in this movie. For once, I felt bad for Flash Thompson. You heard me right. The costume sucked. When they announced that he was going to be the new Spider-Man, I really did not know much about him. I really had not no familiarity with his work prior to Spider-Man. The only film I was really familiar with was The Social Network. I understand this is a reboot, and the purpose is trying not to copy what has been done already, to making Spider-Man a punk and taking inspiration from the Ultimate Spider-Man comic books. Just did not do it for me. It's not like I got the same when I saw Christopher Nolan's Batman Begin reboot reimagination. I was just blown away and amazed how Christopher Nolan made Batman his own and did not copy what Tim Burton did. I understand with so many different adaptations of certain characters like James Bond, Batman, Superman, and the Ninja Turtles. People have their own preference and vision how they see a certain character. To me, when I see Spider-Man, I think smart, nerd, genius, and relatable. In this movie's none of that, except maybe for some scenes, but he was no Tobey Maguire. No matter what other version of Spider-Man, I'm always going to go old school. You will also be surprised and shocked when I say this. This movie makes Spider-Man 3 look like a better movie. Watching this movie makes me wish I was watching a sequel to Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies instead of a reboot. Coming from someone who likes the Lizard Man character, but you'll be shocked to hear me say this, that watching the last second half of this movie when he fights the Lizard Man just bores me for some reason. Despite not being a fan of this movie, I will say it was interesting to see Peter Parker's parents. I can't remember if his parents were mentioned or seen in any comic books that come to mind. They don't delve much into what happened. It's a mystery that was setting up for the rest of the series, where Peter Parker finds out who his parents really were, and that his aunt and uncle will not tell him the truth about his parents. Sally Field and Martin Sheen were okay as Uncle Ben. They were not bad. I don't really have much to say about him, like I do with Rosemary Harris and Cliff Robertson. They made Aunt May look younger in this compared to Rosemary Harris. The famous line, "with great power comes great responsibility," instead in this version, Uncle Ben says, "not choice comes responsibility." It's like they were trying too hard not to copy what Sam Raimi did. As I said before, I know and understand this is a reboot, but I did not like how they redid Uncle Ben's death in this movie. In the first movie with Tobey Maguire, he lets the robber get away being mad at the fight promoter for not getting the money he wanted despite winning the fight. The fight promoter gets robbed, and he lets the robber get away instead of stopping him. It's not like how in Christopher Nolan's Batman reboot, I gave Nolan credit for redoing Batman's origin story told, where Joe Chill was the one responsible for killing Batman's parents, not the Joker. In this movie, Peter Parker does not wrestle like the first Sam Raimi film and the comic books. Instead, he cannot pay for a bottle of chocolate milk. The clerk was being a douchebag, and yes, I get it, store policy, but no need to be an asshole to insult your customers. The robber behind him, instead of pointing a gun at the clerk, he distracts the clerk and throws the bottle at Peter and steals it. The robber robs the store, and Peter lets him get away. When Uncle Ben gets shot, it did not make me cry like Cliff Robertson. Unlike the first Spider-Man movie where Peter Parker found the man who killed his uncle, in this movie, his uncle's killer is still at large. Having rewatched this movie, it's been a long time since I've seen this movie. The part when Spider-Man saves the little boy's life, and the little boy's afraid of Spider-Man, he unmasks him to show that he's not a monster, that he's a human being. The boy's father was played by C. Thomas Howell, who you all know was Ponyboy in The Outsiders, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. I would much rather be talking about The Outsiders instead of this movie. Emma Stone, who I love as an actress, was okay as Gwen Stacy. Unlike the Maguire movies, he's already in a relationship and tells Gwen that he is Spider-Man. A little too early for that in this series. I don't find their chemistry that memorable or interesting like Kirsten Dunst or Tom Maguire's Spider-Man. Dennis Leary is a really funny guy, but in this movie he plays Captain Stacy, a little younger compared to James Cromwell. I feel like he was like the J. Jonah of this movie. In the comic books, Captain Stacy likes and believes in Spider-Man. In this movie, he doesn't believe or like Spider-Man or respect him up until the end of the movie after when he dies. The death of Captain Stacy was done well and okay like in the comic book when he asked Peter to make sure that Gwen is safe and protected. Rice Ice fans at the time when I saw this in the movie theaters, I had no idea who he was. His performance as Dr. Connors and Lizard Man makes me wish I was watching Dylan Baker as Dr. Connors and Lizard Man. He's not memorable like the other villains in the Sam Raimi trilogy. As I mentioned in my previous Spider-Man 3 review, I was very disappointed no Lizard Man in the Sam Raimi movies. I'm also really disappointed how they did Lizard Man in this movie. The CGI look of the Lizard Man was not done very well at all. No Mary Jane in this movie, no J. Jonah Jameson. When I saw this, it made me miss J.K. Simmons a lot. At this point, I thought, well, in the future sequels, the new J. Jonah actor, I thought J.K. Simmons is no longer going to be playing J. Jonah Jameson. But little did I expect they were going to bring him back in the MCU movies. Stan Lee cameo number 19. It was funny when he plays a librarian playing classical music while Spider-Man is fighting the Lizard Man. This is a movie I find boring, forgetful, never had any desire to go back and rewatch over and over again the same way I do about the 2002 Spider-Man film from Sam Raimi. It was not humorous like the Sam Raimi trilogy. I'm not gonna lie, there was not a lot I had to say about this movie. I was very disappointed, not impressed with this reboot. But I'll admit, I don't like this movie, but it's not the worst superhero movie I've seen. So that was my review of The Amazing Spider-Man. Like the video, subscribe, hit the notification bell, get the latest updates on my YouTube channel, and I will see you next time for Amazing Spider-Man 2 movie review from 2014. So, see you next time.